Like most applications, we need to authenticate our users. So currently in Bugporter, we have a .NET MAUI frontend with a form that allows users to report a bug, and those bugs get reported to our Azure Functions backend. But currently we have an issue here, and that is our Azure Functions backend expects users to be authenticated. So it's expecting some kind of token in order to authenticate users. But our .NET MAUI frontend isn't passing up that token. So essentially right now, our .NET MAUI frontend is useless. We're going to attempt to report a bug, but we're not going to have an authentication token, so the request is going to fail to our Azure Functions backend. So ultimately, we need to implement authentication on our .NET MAUI frontend. So how are we going to do this? Well, as we recall, our Azure Functions backend is expecting an authenticated Firebase user. So that being said, we're going to implement Firebase authentication on our .NET MAUI frontend. So let's see what we have on deck. Of course, part one is we need to set up Firebase authentication so that we can connect to our Firebase project and eventually perform authentication tasks such as signing in and signing up. So that being said, once we set up Firebase authentication, we're going to build a sign up form and connect that to Firebase authentication. And then we're also going to build a sign in form and connect that to Firebase authentication as well. Let's get started. So of course, before we can get into building these sign up and sign in forms, we're going to have to set up Firebase authentication. So we could make authentication requests to the Firebase authentication API, but instead we're going to leverage a NuGet package that is going to interface on top of that Firebase authentication API and just make it easier from our perspective so that we don't have to deal with the API at all. We can just call functions on this NuGet package. So let's go manage NuGet packages for our MAUI project. And we're going to search for Firebase authentication.net. And I have done videos on this package in the past, but it actually just released version 4, which is drastically different. So let's see this in action. Let's install this and let's move over to our MAUI program. So this is where we set up dependency injection and we're going to set up Firebase authentication. So ultimately we really want to inject a Firebase auth client throughout our application, and we'll be able to use the Firebase auth client to perform authentication operations such as signing in and signing up. So again, we want to register that in dependency injection, and we're going to set up that Firebase client in here. So let's take our builder services, and we're going to add this as a singleton, and it's going to be a Firebase auth client, and that needs a Firebase auth config. So let's initialize that. And there's a few things we need to provide to this config. So first, let's deal with providers. So this basically defines the different ways that we can sign into our application. So such as with email and password, or with Google authentication, maybe GitHub authentication, any of those OAuth flows. But from a MAUI application, those OAuth flows are a little bit difficult to set up since there's somewhat of a web aspect there. So we're just going to use email and password authentication. So we need to pass in some Firebase auth providers. Let's import that. And actually, this needs to be an array of Firebase auth providers. And the one provider we are going to provide, I guess, is email and password authentication. So we're going to pass in an email provider. Now, this isn't everything that we need for the Firebase auth config. We need to actually connect to our Firebase project. So the next parameter we need to pass is an API key in order to use our Firebase project. So where do we get this from? Well, if we head over to our Firebase project, then click on this gear, go to project settings, we can grab a web API key. So let's copy this and paste this as the API key. And this API key, this is not a sensitive value. It is okay to expose this. And in our case, it's okay to commit this to source control. Now, the next thing we need to provide is an auth domain. And this is essentially the domain of our Firebase project. So we can also grab that from the Firebase console. So we're going to head over to, I believe, authentication, then go over to settings and go to authorized domains. And we can just copy one of these live domains. So we're going to grab bugporter.firebaseapp.com. Let's copy that. And that'll be our auth domain. And in the future, we can think about moving these to some kind of app settings.json configuration file, along with other values as well, such as base URLs to our API. So we will get to that in the future. But for now, this should be everything we need to do to register our Firebase auth client and connect to our Firebase project for authentication. But at the moment, we can't really test this out because we don't use the Firebase auth client anywhere. So that being said, let's move over to our next issue. Let's start with building out the sign up form. And I want to jump straight into using the Firebase Auth client. So rather than building the UI, let's start with creating a command, some kind of sign up command, that'll use the Firebase Auth client to sign up a user. So we're going to put this in a feature folder, again following vertical slice architecture in this project. So we're going to have another feature folder. We're going to call this sign up. And inside here, we're going to have a sign up command. So let's create that. And we're going to ultimately be making a request to Firebase Authentication. That's going to be an async operation. We don't want to block our UI while we're making that request. So let's inherit from async command base, which we implemented in the past. So that already lives in our project. You can find that in source control if you're following along. But let's implement this abstract class. And inside here, we will sign up a user with the Firebase Auth client. So that being said, we're going to need a Firebase Auth client injected through the constructor. We'll call this the auth client. Let's inject that. And we're going to take the auth client and we're going to create a user with email and password async. And we're going to have to get an email and password from probably our view model, which we haven't implemented yet. Let's hard code these values for now. Actually, let's just jump straight into creating our view model. So in our feature folder, we're going to have another class in here. We're going to call this the sign up form view model. This will be the view model for our UI. Since it's a view model, we will inherit from view model base, which lives in our shared layer as well, and just implements notify property changed. So in order to sign a user up, we want to get their email. Let's add an email property to our view model. We also want a password. So let's add a password property. And we're also going to do a confirm password field just to make sure the user typed in the right password. So we'll have another field for confirm password, or another property, I should say. So the user will put in all this information, email, password, confirm password, and then they're going to click some kind of sign up button and it'll execute our sign up command. So let's have another property for the sign up command, and we'll initialize that command in the constructor. So initialize our sign up command that we just created, and that'll need our Firebase Auth client. So we can get that injected through the sign up form view model. Let's add that as a parameter. Let's just import this namespace. And then our sign up command, it's going to need the email and password from the view model. So that being said, we're going to pass in this view model instance to the sign up command. So let's add that as a parameter to the sign up command constructor. Now we have our view model. Let's call it view model. And we want to throw that into a field. We'll call this view model as well. So now that we have the view model and the sign up command, we can grab the email and password off of that. So grab the view model email and the view model password. Let's await this. It could also fail since we're making a request to Firebase Authentication. So let's wrap this in a try catch. And let's actually deal with errors while we're here. And we'll also deal with success cases. But what we're going to do is we are going to display basically a message box. But in .NET MAUI, we don't want to use message box like we used in WPF because that's not cross-platform. Instead, we want to use something called display alert. And we can grab that by digging into application.current.main page and calling display alert. So this might not be like clean MVVM, but I feel pretty comfortable bringing this into at least the view model layer. So title for this error alert, we'll just say error failed to sign up. Please try again later. And just a button that says okay. And then for success cases, have another message box. We'll say success and successfully signed up. We also want to do some validation to make sure the view model password and confirm password are the same value. Ideally, we could handle this at the view model layer with attributes or some kind of validation with notify data error info. So we might get to that in the future. But for now, let's just at least block this in our command. So we'll just check if the view model password doesn't equal the view model confirm password, and we will return early, and we'll show an alert for this case as well. And we'll just say password and confirm password values do not match. So that'll work for now. So this should be sufficient for our sign up command. Now we just need to hook it up to some kind of UI. So in our sign up feature, we're going to have another item in here. This is going to be a content view. And we'll call this the sign up form view. And the reason I made this a content view is because this is not going to be the root page. So the way our application is structured, we already have pages up here. For example, we already have a sign up view up here, which is a content page. And ideally, this sign up view is going to show this sign up form view component, which is the content view. So content pages, which live in this pages layer, will contain content views, such as this sign up form view that lives in our sign up feature folder. So in fact, we can define that right now. So on our sign up view that lives in the pages layer, let's add a sign up form view. And we need to import a namespace for that. We'll call this the sign up feature and point to our sign up feature namespace. Then we can reference our sign up form view. And our sign up form view needs to have a binding context of a sign up form view model so that we can connect to all these properties on our view model. So on the sign up form view, let's define the binding context to be a binding to some kind of sign up form view model. Now, where is this sign up form view model going to come from? Well, our sign up view has a data context of the sign up view model. So the sign up form view model is going to come from a property on our sign up view model. So let's define that property, a sign up form view model. It can just be read only because it's not going to change. We're just going to get it through the constructor. So at this point, we should actually be all wired up. So our sign up form view will bind to our sign up form view model. So on that note, let's build the sign up form. So first we're going to have the email field. Let's put that in its own vertical stack layout. We'll have a label. We'll make it bold. That's what I've been doing for labels on other forms in our app. And the text will just say email. And underneath that, we're going to have an entry. And the text of this entry is going to bind to the email property on our view model. And I think for entries, I've been doing a top margin of 2, just to give a little space between the label and the text box. So we're just going to do the same exact thing for the other entries that we're going to provide. The only difference is that this is going to be for the password field. So it's going to be a binding to password. And for entries, in order to make these appear as password boxes, we need to set is password to true. It's that easy, much easier than it was in WPF with the whole separate password box component, which wasn't very MVVM friendly. Anyways, last field, we need a confirm password, and that'll bind to the confirm password property on our view model. And I also want some margin between these. Let's have like 10 margin to the top between each field group. And finally, at the bottom of the form, we're going to have a button to submit. I suppose the text will say sign up. Give it some top margin of 25, I'd say. And it's going to bind to our sign up command on our view model. And we also want to horizontally align this to the start. Otherwise, it'll take up the entire width of our form, which we don't quite want. So this is just about ready to test out. Let's do some final steps to hook everything up. So I believe we need to register our sign up form view model in dependency injection. So the sign up form view model. Let's register that. And we need to register that because our sign up view model requires or is going to resolve a sign up form view model. But aside from that, I think that's everything we need to register. Already have our Firebase Auth client registered in dependency injection. Really, the last thing we need to do to test this out is we're going to have to move our sign up route to the top so we land on that in the beginning, because right now we don't have any kind of navigation set up, which we will get into in hopefully the near future. But let's run this. Should land on the sign up page and we should see our form. So here we go. Our form is here. It does not look good. We should have some kind of like header at the very top of the form to denote that this is the sign up form. We should also make it not take up the whole width of the screen because we don't need all that real estate. And actually, I would like this sign up button to be the whole width. I feel like that could look nice. So let's make some adjustments here. First, we should probably have a scroll view around our entire sign up view page. And then we need some padding so that we're not pushed all the way up against the screen. Let's do 25. Let's set a maximum width request on our content, maybe to, I'd say 600 or maybe 800, something skinnier. And then I also want a header on this page, so we'll have a label with text that says sign up, and font size should be, I guess, large. And now that we have this header, we should have some margin between our form and the header. We'll do 25 to the top. And I also wanted to make our button take up the entire width, so we'll remove horizontal options of start, and let's see how this looks. And there we go. This looks pretty good. So let's test this out right now in our Firebase project. We have just one user, but let's register one. We'll do test@gmail.com. Let's sign up. There we go. Password and confirm password values do not match. So that validation is working. And we got the CR alert that pops up. Now let's fix this and sign up. And there we go. Successfully signed up. Let's take a look in our Firebase project. And there we go. There's our user. So we are indeed signed up. So sign up form complete. Now let's follow a similar process and implement the sign-in form. Now again, this is going to be super similar to what we just did for signing up. So I feel like we could just copy this sign up folder, the feature folder, and duplicate it. So we're going to call this sign in. We're going to implement a sign in command. Let's not do this rename because it's going to rename our actual sign up command in all places to sign in command. So we're not going to perform the rename everywhere. We'll do this manually and make this the sign in command. And the sign in command is going to use some kind of sign in form view model that we'll implement. For signing in, we don't need this password and confirm password check. And now getting into Firebase, instead of create user with email and password async, we're going to do sign in with email and password async. There we go. We'll say successfully signed in as the success message and failed to sign in as the error message. So now we just need this sign in form view model. Let's rename that in our feature folder. So for the sign in feature, we're going to have a sign in form view model. There we go. Let's not rename everywhere since we need to pretty much do this manually. And in this new sign in form view model, let's get rid of the confirm password field. We don't need that anymore. Our property will be a sign in command. Let's initialize that and rename this constructor. There we go. I also realized this should all be the sign in namespace. So let's change that for the commands as well, which we were just at. And now finally, the sign up form view. Let's rename that to the sign in form view. Let's manually change that throughout the code. Update the namespace. We also need to update the code behind to be the sign in form view and update the namespace. And for the UI, all we need to do is remove the confirm password field, make this button say sign in, and bind to the sign in command. So all good for the UI. And let's move up to the page layer. So let's go to our sign in view model. So this will need a property for the sign in form view model. So same approach that we did for the sign up view model page. And we'll get that through the constructor and we'll use that in the sign in view. So let's actually copy the sign up view page, use that as a starting point, just replace everything, make our header say sign in. We're going to render our sign in form view from the sign in feature. So let's add that namespace. And our sign in form view is going to have a binding context of the sign in form view model. So let's test this out in our app shell. Let's set the sign in page as our first page here so we can see that when we boot up our application. And then in dependency injection, we do need to register our sign in form view model. Let's import that namespace. And let's finally test this out. All right, there we go. There's our sign in view. Let's sign in. So I believe I did test@gmail.com and our password, something like that. Let's try signing in. Successfully signed in. Hooray. And with an incorrect password, failed to sign in. So one thing to note is when we sign in, we actually get back a user credential. So let's see what that is. Let's run this and let's sign in and grab that credential. So here we go. We can look at this auth credential, or no, we can look at the user and the credential, and we can grab a Firebase ID token. So let's copy the value of this and let's bring back authentication on our Bugporter API now. So in our report bug function, previously we commented this out so that we could test our report bug submit from our MAUI application. But now that we're getting closer to auth, let's bring this back and drop a breakpoint here and boot this up. And we're going to make a request to our Azure function, and we're going to paste in our Firebase ID token that we got from signing in our .NET MAUI application. So let's paste this and let's send this request. And boom, here we go. We were successfully authenticated. That succeeded. We didn't get back a 401. We can see we get our user ID. And if we look closer at this authentication result principal, we can see more claims. And here we go. We can see our email that we passed in. But main key here is that we're authenticating users on our front end, and we can at least get a Firebase token that we're eventually going to pass along to our back end. So the last key of all this, which we'll get into in the future, is passing along that Firebase ID token from our Bugporter MAUI client to our Bugporter API. But on that note, we have added our sign-in form, and we've even proven that the Firebase token we get back in the sign-in form will authenticate with our backend API. So our .NET MAUI frontend is one step closer to being useful. We're authenticating users. We just need to pass along the Firebase token to our backend API when we make a request to report a bug. But we've at least added Firebase authentication to our MAUI application. So we set up a Firebase auth client via the Firebase Authentication.NET package, which allowed us to use Firebase authentication and connected us to our Firebase project. And then we simply built out the sign up and sign in forms, leveraging the Firebase Authentication.NET package to perform authentication operations against Firebase authentication. So really the MVP of all this is the Firebase Authentication.NET package. Super easy to use, super easy to interface with Firebase authentication, which Firebase authentication in general is already a great and easy to use third-party authentication platform anyways. So that being said, hopefully you can apply Firebase authentication to your own .NET MAUI front end.